Welcome to the Monday Monologue. This week's episode is about be realistic about your needs. I think a lot of people just don't really sit down and think about what they're going to be using a system for, or the space it's going to be in, or the likely volume levels and all that sort of thing before they go out looking for something. And it's really easy to get excited about, oh, I think I need a 300B amp. I think I want some top shelf kind of stuff. If you're creating a system for use in a part of your house that's mostly for background music, why would you spend a ton of money on some high-end or higher-end gear when something like this is probably all you need? So when I was looking to add some sound music to my downstairs room where I mostly am doing computer work, and I'm probably not going to have the volume turned up very loud, and the music isn't really my primary focus at the time. It's more of a, background multitask kind of a thing. I just something to have some pleasant music in the room. I knew I didn't need some monster system, and so that's why I built this little 6BM8 amp that I did a video series about, and I hooked it up to this little topping DAC, and then I got a pair of these little, what are they, KB15 clip speakers, little icons that were, I think it was $150 for a pair of them. And no, they don't have the frequency response that my main system does, that I use when I'm going to just lay down, close my eyes, and really dive into some music. But I don't need that. And these don't have the frequency response that the RP600Ms have. Good, don't need it. Since this speaker doesn't have a real wide frequency response range, I can get away with these little tiny output transformers. Yeah, they have a lot of distortion under 50 hertz. Guess what? These speakers are never going to hear it. And neither am I, because the system was designed around a certain range and a certain use. And again, don't need a lot of wattage. One and a half watts, plenty. So these little simple amp with two tubes that combine a triode and a power tube into the same tube, little two-in-one guy, it made perfect sense. So it's got a solid state power supply. Don't need a tube rectified power supply when we're doing this simple thing that's not going to be used very loud. It allows a really nice small footprint, but it's still a high quality sound. This little topping DAC puts out 2 volts RMS, so don't need a ton of drive in the amp itself, because it's got a pretty hot input. And I know that's all I'm ever going to drive this amp with, is that DAC that's hooked up to my computer, which I'm using while I'm listening to this music. So it's really simple to control the volume, the music that I'm listening to, the selections, using Amazon HD Music, sending it through a USB cord to this little DAC. Sounds fantastic, fits the job perfect. If I was going to have a little patio room or something where I just wanted some conversational music, this would be all you need. So when you are looking at doing a higher end system, make sure you're taking the whole system into consideration. Everything from the input to the speakers. You need to think about the source you're using. If you're using a fairly modern CD deck, or you're using a phono stage that has pretty good drive already, you can get away with having less gain in the driver section of your amplifier. If you know that you have a fairly weak input signal, you're going to need more gain here. But you don't want to have so much gain that you're only using like the first third of the volume control, because then it makes it real touchy to change the sound pressure levels in the room. You want to have it where, you're 3/4 of the way up on the knob, as loud as you would ever listen to the system. So think about that. The other thing to think about is, what speakers are you going to be driving? If you've got some really efficient, like 100 decibel speakers, do you really need a 300B amp? Do you really need a 30 watt, 20 watt push-pull amp if you're only going to be listening to maybe the first watt or two? Probably not. And I've learned that my 6SQ7 EL34 amp sounds really, really close to what this 300B amp at half the price. I mean, it's so close, I think in a double-blind test, nobody would be able to hear the difference. Any difference I'm hearing is just wishing that this 300B sounds better than that EL34 does with its $14 JJ EL34 tubes. Because I don't need the drive. With the RP 600M speakers, I don't need more than probably 2 watts in the small room that my system's in. The other thing to think about is look at the impedance curve of the speakers that you're going to be driving. If you know that while they're rated at 8 ohms nominal, they've got peaks and valleys and they've got dips down on the low end down near 4 ohms, you want to make sure that your output transformer impedance has some headroom. Like if you know you're at 8 to 10 ohms across pretty flat, for a 300B amp, you'd probably want to get 3.5K output transformers. If you got some speakers like my Clipses that I know dip down to 4 ohms down on the low end, I put 5K output transformers because I wanted some headroom there so we're not going to end up with a distorted signal at the low end because we're pulling the reflected ohms down lower than what these output tubes want to see. So really think through the whole system when you're going to be building it, because it's called a system for a reason. And without thinking through that process, you're not going to get what you really want out of your system. So anyway, hopefully this has given you a couple of things to think about it. I know it was kind of a light episode, but we're going to cut it there. And hope you're enjoying my videos. If you are, please subscribe, please like, and we'll see you next week on the Monday Monologue.